And again, I think it was mentioned, in terms of which side are you on. I think Ireland very clearly and rightly is on the side of international law and of humanity and of peace. And that is our record, and that's where we come in, and that's where we add value in situations such as this. And it is then entirely consistent with that position that we express directly and clearly our solidarity with Ukraine, as I think Ireland rightly has done, and indeed as we will with the motion tomorrow here in this House. That we express the solidarity with Ukraine, with Ukrainian people in the struggle they are facing at the moment, and also that we condemn resolutely and completely Russian actions, because we are condemning them because they are in breach of international human rights law and human law. They're in breach of the fundamental UN Charter. So that UN Charter, where we founded coming out of World War II, which was founded with the goal of peace, specifically the very first line is to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, that armed force should not be used save in the common interest. Because when we talk about the choices that we have and where we are really, this is a key battle. It's not solely about Russia and Ukraine. It's not solely about it's about also, do we have an international politics of principles, or do we move back into the version of politics, that imperial version of politics, which is clearly part of the philosophy and agenda promoted by Vladimir Putin, where it is about might and military might, where military might decides everything. Because we had centuries of that. We had centuries of military might, and that's why I do note with caution when those who say it's simply about military might versus military might. We need to be fighting, not simply in relation to the principle of condemning a occupation, a military invasion, but also in pushing back with every international multilateral instrument of diplomacy that we have, of sanction and of other pressure to say, no, we believe in international rule of law, we believe in those instruments, and in battling, you're not just battling in relation to, you are battling for how we do things in this world, and how Europe does things, and how the UN does things. And that's why things like the International Criminal Court prosecutions are going to be really important. That's why diplomatic tools and tools that are we've had this, and it is a little frustrating because we've talked of sanctions, being a problem in other contexts, and now we're talking about them. I agree with sanctions as a tool of diplomacy, a hard tool of diplomacy that needs to be used. And it is appropriate that they're used in this circumstance, very much so. And it is also important that we push for the humanitarian issues. And I don't think that it's a small thing to give protective equipment or to give medical aid. I think it's a really important and vital thing. And it's vital for the signal in terms of what we believe acceptable in terms of how people are treated and what people suffer. It's an important thing. And when we talk about demilitarization, I just want to point, we've all been shocked to see the cluster munitions, which seem to be foiled. I was there when I was in Croke Park when Ireland negotiated, representing Croke as part of the cluster munition coalition, when Ireland led the negotiations for a ban on cluster munitions, which used to be commonplace and which used to be used everywhere. It is now Russia as a nation flouting international law that uses them. But the fact that we made them unacceptable on that wider scale, that's something that we used our power, our diplomacy to do. That's an example of where Ireland has made a huge difference in terms of saving lives. To return very briefly to the sanctions, I think it's appropriate we take those strong measures. I think they're measures that we should be using in other contexts as well. And I think the SWIFT measure, it's going to be important. I do support it. I think it needs to be done. It has to be done in a way where we try to ensure that we do it in a way that gives maximum impact on the Russian regime, but insofar as we look to protect ordinary Russians. But what we don't want, and this is the bit, is that we have the SWIFT on banking, but that the very wealthiest oligarchs get to move their money around through places like the IFSC as they have been, and as has been pointed out, unfortunately, to the Irish government for the last year and a half, there's 34 billion held by Russian-linked shell companies in the IFSC. The Section 110 companies that we talked about, that were debated in these houses, this is the kind of thing. And so we need to tackle those. So I would urge that we don't simply look to the banking system, but we look to our role and complicity in relation to that. Again, in terms of Saudi money, the same issues apply. Again, sorry, thank you, Chair. I know I went slightly over there. But that is the last thing I would say, that showing that we're willing to act on this is going to be showing not that we're willing to rattle sabres, but that we are willing to rattle shareholders and stock markets if that's what's required in order to hold up principles of international law.